I'm Christopher Lydon, and this is Open Source. With a capsule of memory from late last year, it was a spark of generosity in your story, Liz Walker, that lit up the Christmas season for lots of us, and maybe the path ahead. You've been a pathfinder for decades, in television newscasting in Boston, then as an ordained minister, leading the Roxbury Presbyterian Church in town, and then in the work of post-traumatic healing in your church and in the wider community. And then, out of the blue, came the news before Christmas that you were going to visit Palestine to witness and learn about a scene that you knew mainly from the headlines. What made it exciting to me was your saying that you had barely the dimmest picture of what you were getting into with Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied West Bank town of Bethlehem. And yet what all of us knew was that you were up to it and that you would walk us through the experience when you came back. What did you see, Liz Walker? And what is the feeling that sticks with the newswoman, the minister of healing, the Bostonian?
Chris, I love the way you introduced me. First of all, I'm delighted to be here with you. And you said I didn't have the dimmest idea of what I'd be going into in Palestine. But in reality, that kind of sums up my whole life, because I have made a lot of changes and moved in a lot of directions and never really had a master plan. So the trip to Palestine was at the invitation of a group called Churches for Middle East Peace, a group I just heard of in Boston, quite serendipitously, or quite led by the Holy Spirit, depending on your tradition. But this group has been working on policy and working on many issues in the Middle East for many years. They're based in Washington, D.C., and many churches belong to this group, Churches for Middle East Peace. They had planned these conferences and have had these conferences in the past, and COVID hit. They weren't able to have their last summit that they had planned, and so this was just picking it back up. And then, of course, October 7th happened, and they couldn't do it. So they invited us because, of course, the issue in the Middle East right now is trauma. There are lots of issues. I'm not looking at the politics of it. I'm looking at the kind of collateral damage of the politics. It's trauma. People are in pain. People everywhere in that part of the world. The Israelis are in pain because of what happened. Unbelievable pain. And the people that invited us to come and talk to them with our community program, which is called Can We Talk? It's a grassroots, community-based, spiritually inspired program, clinically supported, that allows people to talk about their mental health challenges. And trauma, psychological and emotional trauma, is the biggest mental health challenge that I would argue that we as a world face, but certainly we as a nation, and certainly in the Middle East. So we were invited to take this little grassroots program to a group of Christian Palestinian women who meet regularly, and see if that would help them kind of process the hell that they are living in right now.
Let me just say what I see on the Standard, some of it excellent television coverage, Frontline among others, about the Gaza war and the territories, is relentless cruelty. Trauma, yes, but nobody's pausing, nobody's forgetting, nobody's hesitating. It goes on and on and on. How much of that feeling did you get among the Palestinian women in Bethlehem?
What I saw in Palestine is the same thing I see in Roxbury to a certain extent. Let me be careful what I'm saying here.
Yep.
My point is not the origin of the trauma, but the result. That people are frozen in fear. People are going through excruciating means of just living day to day because of what they've experienced and witnessed. In Roxbury, it could be violence on the streets. Certainly in Gaza, it's a war. But in the West Bank, where we were, in Bethlehem and in Jericho, people are living under not knowing what's going on day by day, having relatives slaughtered in other parts of that region, being intimidated by checkpoints and being bullied. And I mean, this is their story. It's not my story, but the results of all the things that are happening. Now, let me be careful here, because certainly people in Israel who were attacked on October 7th are traumatized. So this notion of trauma is not a political statement. It is a human condition. And we talked to people who are not directly impacted by the war, meaning there are no bombs over Bethlehem, but are certainly indirectly impacted by what's going on. And the region is, it's a very sad place. I have been to Bethlehem twice before because, in my Christian tradition, that's where you go to see the Church of the Nativity, where Jesus, supposedly was born. And you see all these different sites that bring the Bible alive. And to go to Bethlehem now is to see empty places and people who, economically are really suffering because of this horrible situation that's going on in Gaza that's affecting all of the region. So when I say trauma, that's what I'm talking about. People who are trying to live their lives, but are living their lives under the threat of extreme violence and knowing that extreme violence is going on not far from where they are.
Liz, where did you meet them? And what was their expectation of you? What were their numbers, among other things?
It was a real emotional kind of a experience for me. The summit that was sponsored by this group called Churches for Middle East Peace and a Palestinian group of Christians called And Still We Rise, a women's group from Bethlehem Bible College.
That sounds like Maya Angelou.
That's exactly what those words are from. So when we got there, there were probably about 100 women, mostly from the local area, because other people were afraid to come in. Women who are, just church women. People say, well, who were they and what were they doing? Palestinian Christians are directly connected to the apostles. I mean, so you can't get more Christian than that in our tradition, right? So these are women of faith who are trying to live their lives in the midst of this horrible situation there. These are not political. I mean, I guess to live there, you have to be political because there's so much that affects you wherever you are and whoever you are. But those were the groups that we met. Women who lived in Bethlehem, women who lived in Jericho, women who lived in other towns in that region who were a part of this conference, who are, I think, looking for hope. In our tradition, we call it making a way out of no way. And that's what I think these people are doing, but holding on to their faith.
Describe that faith.
The faith is that we come from Jesus. Our ancestors were the apostles, that this is the church where Jesus was born, that this is the mountain of Golgotha. It's our neighborhood. This is our land, and that's how they look at it. But that's the land that's contested, right? This is land that's been contested since biblical days. And so this is still at issue. And it's one thing to read about that and take a side, but it's very different to go there and see people who are trying to carry on in the midst of what just looks like a hopeless situation. So no bombs were falling there. I want to make sure that people understand. It's just an atmosphere of trying to find hope when there's a lot of hopelessness. But what I think sustains them is their community, their church, and holding on to each other. And I think that was very apparent to us. They looked at us, I think, with some curiosity. Who the heck are these people and what the heck do they think they can do? But I think they appreciated the fact that to be a Christian, I believe, is to witness. And we couldn't fix the situation. That wasn't what we were there for. We were there to witness to the suffering. And we believe we can find a way of healing through just mutuality. I call it a mutuality of mercy because we're suffering too. And so that's how we went, with a spirit of humility, to let them know that they were not alone, that we were listening, because these people, I'm not talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the people in that part of the world, regardless of your culture, feel forgotten. That's a real strong thread that runs through all of the Middle East. People who have family members who are hostages feel forgotten. They don't want to be forgotten. They want people to remember what they went through on October 7th. People who are in Palestine, who are ducking bombs every day, feel forgotten by the world. So all we did was to go there and say, you are not forgotten. We will cry with you, and we will pray with you, and we will hug you if that's what you want. And that's what we did. So it was a very kind of intimate, and I would call it a small, kind of a reach. But I think those are the kinds of gestures that we need in times like these.
Liz, do we also invoke the suffering of Jesus in this story, the crucifixion, after all?
I did not go there to preach a sermon, but I think as a Christian, yes, that's how we look at suffering. That's how we look at kind of the state of the world in Jesus' words, and certainly the life of Jesus and the life that we base our faith on is a life of suffering. So yes, we do invoke that. There's different ways to look at that. I think it helps us understand that we are all wounded. I think that the fact that Jesus came in the flesh and was crucified in the flesh helps us understand the wounds that we bear. So that's what I think of when I talk about our experiences there. It doesn't mean that, oh my goodness, everything's going to be all right. All you got to do is wait 3 days and you'll rise. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we are all wounded, and it's by our love for each other that we can kind of help each other in our wounds.
We also hear that resurrection is part of our story, too. I mean, I hear that in my church.
Absolutely. Resurrection is a part of it. I didn't know I was coming on this show to talk theological implications, Chris. Do you want me to get on my soapbox? Because I will jump into the pulpit. We put on our masks. We say, get over it. We say we are strong. And in fact, we're not strong. We're very fragile. The human condition is very fragile. And so when we mask ourselves with all these other things, that's how wars get started. That's why young men in inner cities pick up guns. I mean, it's kind of simple in a way that we don't understand the notion of community to the depth that it should be understood. So that's my pulpit address, that we need to learn to love each other. And who says that, Chris? How often do you hear that except for on Sunday mornings? We're saying, let's take that out in the world, wherever we can go and show that love. Did that change the situation in the West Bank? I'm not naive, but I believe if we keep doing that, eventually it may make a difference.
I think knowing more gets us closer to dealing with it. We were very much impressed by Nathan Thrall's book on the West Bank, about the West Bank, in which the main observation perhaps was that the wall, through lots of Israel, is the biggest token of hiding the problem, hiding Palestinians, hiding all the obstructions that in this particular story prevented the victim of an accident getting to a hospital. No, you can't get there from here. That kind of sort of denial of an apartheid, intensely regulated and discriminatory society. Where did you see a sort of kernel of the suffering that these women were telling you about?
The interesting sights for me came at the very beginning of the conference. The women were in areas right around where we were holding this summit in Jericho. And the first day of the summit, a group of women told us the bus they were on, coming from their community, I don't remember, I think it was Bethlehem, but I'm not sure, coming to Jericho, they have to go through checkpoints. And the bus that they were on was behind another bus, not a part of their entourage, but still there. And a young man was pulled off the bus and beaten. And they saw that. They have no idea who he was, why he was beaten, what the situation was. It threw them so much that they came into the conference, kind of shaking from that experience. Just hearing about it gives me chills even now thinking about what I heard. But then they told us, we don't look at this as what you might look at it, because we did discuss trauma with them. And they said there is no such thing as post-traumatic stress syndrome or post-traumatic stress disorder here, because trauma is ongoing. There is always something that's going to happen that will, throw you, that will terrorize you. We came through very easily from Boston to Montreal to Amman, Jordan, and then into Bethlehem and then into Jericho. And we had to go through many checkpoints and nothing happened to us. But other people tell the stories of how hard it's to live with many walls. My experience was only a week, but we met people who had gone through a lot of hard times and continue to go through hard times.
You said these women wept, and you wept with them. Did any of them denounce the United States' role in the wider situation?
It's not just the United States, it's that the world is remaining silent when people are dying, and you hear that all the time. So the stories we heard were more personal stories, and we promised, because of the setup and the format of our community healing program, that we would not share any stories. But there are people who lost relatives on October 7th, and trauma is not something you just get over and move on to the next news story. We might do that as reporters, but that's not how people live. And when we talk to people in Jericho or in Roxbury, we're talking to people who are now changed forever by the extreme circumstances and experiences that they have, struggled through. I don't believe the answers are political. I'll be even bolder to say I believe the answers are human, one-on-one. You got to heal. You got to heal. That's what changes things when you heal on the inside. Now, this is what Jesus said. He said you got to change your heart. And so this program that we took to the West Bank was one of those heart-changing programs. It's not something that's done just on a one-time situation. You've got to remain with people and listen and talk and hear their hearts. And that's what we were trying to do.
Liz, before you left, we almost laughed about the fact that we'd never met a mass of Palestinian people in their own terms, in their own language, in their own definition of the situation. What did you come away with after a week, 10-day immersion as your sense of the Palestinian people? Who are they, after all?
I can only speak for the women that I talk to, and they are beautiful women who have been through, the only way to describe it is hell. I don't believe they're political advocates. I think they're advocates for their communities and for their families. I think they're women who are incredibly strong, incredibly courageous, and I think you have to be when you live in an environment where there is violence. I think that of anyone, wherever you are in the world, who has to live in that day in and day out, because that kind of life changes you. I love their courage. I love their resilience. And I was inspired by their faith. Because again, we were talking to people of faith who are saying that they believe that God will somehow deliver those in pain, because that's what the Bible says. And they believe that, and they are living that out in just dire circumstances. These were middle-class people who have lost their jobs, because in this area, tourism is a huge part of the economy in Bethlehem.
Right.
That's what it is. So if you don't have a tour bus coming through, your little shop is empty. And we kept running into people like that who are trying to still send their children to school, who are trying to still have hope for the future, but the circumstances are dire there.
Liz Walker, I want to be clear that I have nothing but respect more than ever for your own courage, for your own activism, for your own faith, and you're putting it on the line. I can't thank you enough for the example you've given all of us, but for the conversation just now on Open Source. Liz Walker, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's always good to talk to an old friend, so thank you.
Liz Walker's work and spirit will be out in book form in April. Her title is No One Left Alone: How Community Helps Us Heal. It's listener support that keeps us alive at Open Source. Thank you for the end of the year contributions from listeners. If you missed your cue, do your part this minute to keep the first and longest running podcast going strong. Visit us at radioopensource.org/donate. Happy New Year, and thank you